I'd like to thank everyone to come to this presentation today for this awe-inspiring and exciting inspection and compliance presentation. I can only assume by the lack of applauses that everybody is still sitting silently in suspense to hear me talk some more. But all jokes aside, I'd like to take this moment to actually talk about the inspectors and the enforcers here. Without them, this regulatory framework would not work. And if we could take a moment and just give them a round of applause. Now, our goal today is to talk about the overview of inspections and compliance. We'll speak about the lessons that we learned and the issues that we encountered. And for a little background information, at Denver, we have several agencies that do inspection. I'm not going to go through all these, just let you know these presentations are available online. But for a few, we have about, I think, 5 people or 6 agencies that's going to be presenting today. And our state partner, the Marijuana Enforcement Division. In Denver, we have 8 distinct marijuana licenses. So there's 4 retail and 4 medical. And that includes the sales centers, the grow centers, infused products, and testing labs. You heard a couple of different things. It's according to who pulls the information at what time. But currently, Denver has approximately 1,091 licenses, and they're operating out of 481 unique locations / storefronts. As you can see through this, our marijuana facilities and industries, they get inspected on a regular basis. The fire department expects them twice a year, and excise and licensing go out once a year. So we have a very strong inspection and compliance kind of framework. This right here is telling how many inspections we do a year. You can see in 2015, which is a full year, that we do almost a little over 8,000 inspections a year, with community planning and development being the majority and the fire department being the second. 2016 only looks minimal because we haven't finished with 2016, and when I pulled this data, there's still a few more months to go. If there's one thing I could tell you right now in press, and we all know this, you have heard this going out through this presentation, this symposium, start planning now for legalization. And by planning, I mean start thinking about hiring additional staffs. We all want to assume that marijuana is like alcohol, but it's different, and you may need dedicated staff for marijuana inspection enforcement. So one thing I could press is start planning and start getting a budget allocation for additional staff. Second, start thinking about your lean process improvements. When we started this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we wanted to make it like alcohol, but that didn't work. So we have to now start developing new process, such as a QC process in licensing for our city attorney's office. So one thing I want you to think of is just start developing these new processes for marijuana specifically. And start cross-training your agencies. Before these agencies went out, they did what they normally did, but with marijuana, it touches so many different agencies that they need to all understand what each and every agency is doing, and especially with your state, and set up that communication with your state department and your local departments, so there's always communication flowing and everybody knows what they're doing. And next, I'm going to have the Marijuana Enforcement Division come up, our state partners, Dave Miller, and he'll give a little introduction about himself and discuss what he does.
Good morning. My name is Dave Miller. I'm the Chief of Investigations for the Enforcement Section for the Marijuana Enforcement Division here in Colorado. I've been with the division for over 5 years now, since the inception with medical marijuana in 2011, before the rules actually went into place. I'd like to talk briefly about the authority for the state licensing authority. It's grounded actually in statute in Title 12. And that authority also enumerates the actual responsibilities for the state licensing authority, which is the executive director for the Department of Revenue in Colorado. It's to grant or refuse licenses, suspend, fine, revoke, or impose penalties, hold disciplinary hearings, excuse me, deny licenses and rulemaking. The foundation for the MED or the MMED started in 2009 legislative session with House Bill 1284, which created the Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division. 3 years later, House Bill 1317 created the Marijuana Enforcement Division. That's where we are today. It's a dual licensing process in the state. And there's an opt-out, opt-in section for local licensing authorities and jurisdictions. The state sets the minimum standards for the laws and regulations. The state license is also conditional upon approval from the local licensing authority, so that businesses can't operate until they have both licenses approved, both from the state and the local licensing authority. Talk a little bit about a collaborative approach, because I can kind of go back to where I started from. And what we were doing and what Brian was talking about here a few minutes ago, we were trying to enforce rules that were just coming into place that on businesses that were already in operation, based on, from a state perspective, based on how other Department of Revenue enforcement agencies worked. And that was, I think, looking back and my perspective now, it was fine for where we were. But if I look at the infrastructure wasn't necessarily built out at the time at the local level. And I think we had a little bit different role 5 years ago than what we have today. And I'd like to go into a few examples of how that might work for us. I'd first like to give you an example of, maybe take you back a little bit to what you heard yesterday and some this morning about where we are. We have 104 separate jurisdictions in the state of Colorado, 8 types of licenses, as Brian mentioned, the very same licenses. And in January 1st of 2017, we have an additional license coming on, which is a transporter license. There's 2,879 licenses in the state. 1,500 plus are medical. 1,300 are retail at this point. In addition, our staff also has to issue occupational licenses, support, key, and associated key. The lowest level of background requirement is the support license. Then the highest level is the associated key, which has some ownership with the business. Currently, we have 24,400 occupational badges in the state inventory system, and there's 29,292 that are active. To date, since we started 5 years ago issuing the licenses, we've issued 51,000 occupational support badges, key, and associated key licenses. The last few years have been sort of speeding up for us. We have averaging about 13,000 to 14,000 of those occupational badges a year. We're out to about 1,200 to 1,300 a month for our staff. In addition, we have renewals, change of ownership, change of location, modification of premises, change of corporate structure, change of trade names. And then with medical, we have 70/30 waiver requests that we have to process. And then in addition to that, we also have product management retail that we work with, and that's tier change requests. In round numbers, I can tell you that the latest statistics is 897,300 marijuana plants that are being tracked in our metric system as of yesterday. Interesting fact, that's a combination of both medical and retail. Denver has 57% of those 897,000 plants throughout the state. The medical cultivations typically produce about 50% of what they're allotted, and the retail cultivations are currently producing about 30% of their allotment. Medical cultivations are strictly regulated by statute. And in a sense, we have about 61,000 patients that are registered in metric through whichever dispensary they have signed up with. It allows that dispensary to grow plants for them. Generally speaking, we're looking at 6 plants and 2 ounces. And that's how we evaluate their on-hand inventory and their plant count. All of our inventory and production management is based strictly on plant count. With the retail side, we have tiers 1 through 5 plus. I think there's 610 retail cultivations in the state currently. The lowest level is 1,800 plants, that's the tier 1. The highest level is a tier 5 plus, and it goes up in increments after that. At tier 5 plus, I believe there's only 7 of the 600 plus retail cultivations that are at that level currently. I think there's 93% of the 600 retail cultivations are producing less than 3,600 plants each. To date, when Metric went online, you can kind of envision that product moving back and forth across the state and across the city. We currently have 836,000 documented transportation manifests since January 1st of 2014. In addition to kind of that overview there, as you've heard, the industry continues to evolve and change, which the byproduct of that is the rules continue to evolve and change. So each legislative session brings change for us. We have 2 separate codes with 15 series in each code, medical side, retail side. In the 2016 legislative session, there were 10 bills that passed that had some impact on rules or our operations. And that equated to, as of January 1st, 147 separate changes to our rules and regulations. Give you an example of one particular series of rules. Packaging and labeling is 31 pages. The labels themselves require 24 separate items on the label that we're responsible to ensure are there. So you can kind of see the constant changes. Not only does when the legislative session ends, but the changes take place sometimes throughout the year. So some of them are concurrent with the end of the legislative session, which ends in May. Some of the rules go into effect in July, August, October, and now we're into looking forward to January 1st of 2017. On January 1st, there'll be 125 separate and distinct rules regulating medical marijuana and 124 that are regulating retail marijuana. So roughly 1/3 of our staff is dedicated to post-compliance. The other 2/3 have an enormous burden of many of the things that I just mentioned to you with the licensing component, renewals, and working with applications, doing backgrounds and issuing the licenses. So that 1/3 right now for us equates to approximately 29 compliance and criminal investigators throughout the state in 4 different regions. We have offices. We just moved from Denver to Lakewood here in the metro area. We have offices in Grand Junction, Longmont, which is north of here, and then our Colorado Springs office, which is south of Denver. One of the things that I would like to point out is over the last 5 years is maybe one of the biggest lessons that we have learned, and I have learned in particular, is that effective compliance, monitoring, and enforcement management really has to be guided by strategic direction with clear priorities in place. When we started, we didn't have those in place. So how do you get there? Our role from a field enforcement section really has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. As I mentioned when we started, a lot of the infrastructure that's in place, that's sitting at the table here today in the city of Denver, wasn't in place. And so we had an obvious different role there. It's taken the last 5 years around the state for a lot of that infrastructure and individual communities to start doing the types of inspections and compliance work that we were doing early on. And so I looked at our role, and we have to evaluate how we're using the resources that we have with that constantly changing environment and the number of licenses that we're actually responsible for. And one of the ways I think we need to evaluate that to start with, which really wasn't possible 5 years ago, is to start with the foundation that business owners want to run a legal and compliant business. If you start with that as a basic foundation, then what is the Marijuana Enforcement Division's role and responsibilities? And as we talked about, you know, the division is responsible for regulating, controlling, and licensing all commercial marijuana in the state. But how do you do that with 2,800 separate licenses that are constantly changing and rules that are constantly changing? And part of what the collaborative method here has allowed us to do is step back and as Brian showed you, Denver's doing thousands of inspections on these businesses. And one of the things that started to happen to us is going in and speaking with the owners and doing our own inspection process. And somebody would say, well, you guys were just here last week. And they don't know the difference between the local authority and the state authority. And so we started to joke, well, we don't want to be walking in the front door when the fire department's walking out the back door. And so we try to evaluate how we use our resources, and that's where it goes back to that, strategic direction and clear priorities. What's the greatest value now that the state investigators bring to the post-licensing process for compliance? And so in evaluating that, it's really kind of a shift for us in what our role has been. And we're moving away from that reactive piece, which is pretty chaotic, as you've heard, and the event-driven concept. And by that I mean that's a traditional method of a new business license or an annual business inspection or a modification of premise or a change of location requires another business inspection. And then trying to find the resources to go out and keep up with that, which literally sometimes just in the metro area, there could be 15 to 20 of those changes in a week. So, going back to how do you look at that strategic direction and how do you set your priorities? We have our statutes, we have our rules in place, and then we overlay what the priorities are from the state licensing authority, which is really guided, as you've heard, by that trio of Cole memos over the last 5 years. So what it amounts to is focusing more attention on public safety issues. But when you're focusing your attention on strictly public safety issues, how do you do that? Do you do it through rules? And how do you know which rules are going to have the greatest impact? And that's the difficult part about setting that strategic direction. Looking at public safety, consumer safety, regulatory compliance. Is it purely administrative harm in a regulatory sense that we're looking at, or is there a potential public safety harm that we're looking at? So from our past experience, we're trying to move toward a more proactive approach and move from that event-driven activity, which requires inspections, to a more proactive model where we're looking at violations of the threat of harm to the public. So one of the ways that we are doing that is through our risk-based investigation system, and we've been working on that for the last 2.5 to 3 years. The difficulty in that is the risk indicators. We're in a place right now that when I look back and see what's our value added to the local jurisdictions, and that is we have access to the RFID technology and we have the data, almost 3 years of it now, that is going into our metric system. And with that metric system, we're able to look at what risk indicators and the value of those risk indicators to make a determination of how we're going to do our investigations, how we're going to do our inspections, and how those are prioritized. Now, they've changed over a period of time, and they're focused on a number of issues, but the goal is to move more toward those public safety problems and recognize what those are through those indicators in the metric system. We have millions of data points now and lots of norms to look at throughout the industry that we didn't have just a few years ago. We do that through a process that we're referring to as a level of investigation. So we start with a level 1, 2, and then 3. Level 1 has multiple meetings to our staff. It's a way of us communicating and documenting what we're doing so that if there is an actual investigation later, everybody will understand the depth of that investigation or inspection process. So much of what we do is off-site monitoring because we can see all of the business records that are in metric, and we evaluate that information with past complaints, compliance history, licensing history, look at advertising, social media, and a number of other things to make a determination of which businesses we're going to actually do a physical inspection on. And then we move to that level 2 inspection, which is kind of integrating the traditional model of going out and looking at 30% of what we're evaluating from our office. And then we use that information to generate other cases. Our compliance staff will pass on more complex, maybe public safety related cases to our criminal investigators. And the point of keeping our compliance investigators in the field with the businesses is to try to use them in a business mentoring sense for lower level issues, because we feel like if we can approach it from that business mentoring foundation through verbal warnings, written warnings, and even some lower-level administrative actions, we can get businesses back into compliance and keep the more difficult cases that we've had to deal with summary suspensions and orders to show cause from rising to the top. Start it in the business with that compliance model, using a number of our resources to that lower level piece, and then applying the majority of our resources toward those public safety violations. And the last level that we look at is essentially a more complex investigation, and that is our level 3 investigation process. That our investigators work with our supervisory staff and requiring them to come up with an investigative plan outlining what their objectives are in that particular case, which have to be based on rule and statute. And we look at what evidence is required, sampling methodology, witnesses that need to be interviewed, documents, what information we need from our analysis section, and the resources and time frame involved in how that actual investigation is going to take place. Moving on to issues and concerns. Obviously, you've heard this over the last day or so. There's a continued use of pesticides in the marijuana industry. Our governor's executive order came out, I believe it was last November of 2015. And there's that continued use. It's very time consuming for us and the agencies that we work with. I think we have just over 50 cases in 2016, and those come in to us a number of ways. A lot of it's generated from the City of Denver's public health, which goes to the State Department of Agriculture, which then we work with closely on these particular cases, or it may come in directly to our division and we send it to the Department of Agriculture, and then we work closely with them on the investigation. Unlawful financial assistance is a problem, and it's pretty complex because it's a very cash-strapped business, and because of the banking issues that you've heard about, it can take all kinds of forms, and that continues to be an issue for us. Dual licensing sounds good, but we've had some issues with that obvious operating before both licenses are actually in place. And there's a number of reasons why we believe that's happening, and we're trying to work on problem solving with that. Production management on the medical side has been a problem over the last year. Plant counts, again, are based on patients, and so some of it's poor record keeping, and some of it's just trying to get a gain on the industry to sell marijuana. Perhaps one of the issues that is kind of most understated is, and maybe anecdotally anyway, the greatest source of diversion from the commercial market is the burglaries that are occurring. And you know, the division needs to take a stronger role in working with local law enforcement, because obviously when you're looking at these cases, which are investigated by the local law enforcement agency, many of these cases, it's obvious when you're looking at the video that the people that are committing these crimes have absolute knowledge of the business, where the product is kept. To walk in a 3,000 or a 30,000 square foot warehouse at 2 o'clock in the morning and know exactly where you're going in the dark, avert the alarm system, and take the product and be in and out of there in a few minutes' time, it's obvious that there's people that are either in the industry, have been in the building, or there's some level of cooperation there in many of these, and we need to be able to move forward in a collaborative manner to try to resolve that. I'd say one of the last issues that that I would say in trends that are occurring for us, that we see, and is going to continue to occur, is packaging and labeling issues. 5 years ago, I think edibles were less than 10% of the market in Colorado, and today they're near 40%. And so that continues to evolve and change. As you heard yesterday, part of that is moving toward the universal symbol, which is now required on all our edible products. The other issue that I think is important, that's sort of understated, is in 2014, law passed that businesses were required to report crimes against the business or crimes on the premises to our division. And I don't know if we have a clear picture yet of how much of that information we're actually getting in, but it's clear that employee theft is a significant issue to businesses. And it shouldn't really be a surprise to us. I think the latest statistics from 2015 indicate that the greatest risk to any retail business is employee theft. And I think the last I read was somewhere in the range of $60 billion. So why would the marijuana business be a whole lot different than that? And that's something that we're keeping an eye on. And last, and I don't know if anybody's crossed this, Rich, but it seems to be becoming more of an issue, is website hijacking. It's third parties copying text and photos and logos off of our business websites. And they're setting up these phony websites that are almost identical to what our businesses are. And they're selling marijuana or purporting to sell marijuana with home delivery. And they're taking money and personal identification information from the people that are ordering the marijuana from them. And you can imagine a lot of that is from out of state until they get enough money or somebody starts getting onto it and they close that website and they open another one. That continues to be a problem with us. We get calls directly from our businesses, but mainly what we're doing right now is trying to collect information and refer it to the appropriate agency, CBI for us, and the Attorney General's office for their fraud division. The last thing I'd like to say in closing is, we believe we're going to continue to develop strong investigative skills, which will help us revise our strategies as our experience grows. Part of that will be those risk indicators that we're looking at and looking for more high-quality alerts or indicators for us. That evidence-based investigations and a targeted approach that we're trying to take hopefully will develop over time as our intelligence grows and the nature and level of compliance in the industry becomes more evident to us. Thank you.
They wanted to see if I would get stuck or fall on the way, but I made it. So, hello everybody, thanks for coming to our presentation. My name is Nicole Skolmel, and I am the Operations Supervisor for Denver Fire in the Fire Prevention Division. I'm going to give you a brief overview of kind of our inspections and permitting process today, and then one of our inspectors is going to get a little bit more in depth and talk about some technical elements and specifics. So Denver Fire conducts inspections in all commercial facilities annually. Most of these are handled by our operations, which is going to be your local fire station coming out and doing an inspection. It's about 21,000 occupancies that they conduct inspections in. When they come out and do these inspections, they're going to be looking for building and fire code issues, as well as conducting a pre-plan. So getting a layout of the facility and having an idea of what they're going to encounter should there ever be an incident response. The pre-planned inspections and the operations input related to marijuana has been very important to us just because they're kind of the boots on the ground and sometimes can give us some information either early on or about facilities that we may not have information on. There may be things like illegal facilities or places that are under construction that haven't obtained permits. So we rely heavily on those inspections for additional information related to marijuana. And then the other inspections are conducted by fire prevention groups. This is about 6,000 of the occupancies in Denver. These are going to be the more hazardous or specialized inspections. So some of the groups are flammables, hazmat, institutions, and then this is also where our marijuana inspections group falls under. The marijuana inspections group conducts inspections about 630 facilities, and we're going to do those twice annually, so once in the first half of the year and then another time in the second half. They're going to be looking at the same thing, the building and fire code issues, and then they also look for marijuana business operational elements, so things like operational permits that are required by us. They're going to verify that they have the correct types of licenses for the things that they're doing. And then also they'll look at the systems that they may have there, so things like CO2 enrichment or extraction, those are kind of big ones for us. And then the marijuana group also issues these operational permits, so those are going to be mirroring the excise and license types of licenses that they hold, so retail and medical, they'll have different permits for those, as well as all of their hazardous material storage, and then again, the extraction processes and things like that. The marijuana group will do additional inspections depending on the type of permits that they have. If they need to do things like CO2 acceptance testing, they'll go out and make sure that the system is functioning according to what was permitted and that everything is working correctly. And then we also have some other groups that are coming out from Denver Fire, which are going to inspect marijuana facilities, and these will be the Certificate of Occupancy and Licensing Group. They're the ones who will actually sign the license or inspection cards issued by Excise and License or the building department. And then they may also see our testing group if they have fire safety systems that they're upgrading and need tests on those as well. So they'll be seeing the fire inspectors a few times depending on what they have. And then additionally, the marijuana group conducts non-scheduled inspections, which may include illegal or potentially illegal locations, both commercial and residential. So the inspectors conduct these routine inspections, and basically they're looking for a set list of things. We do use checklists, and these are very important for us to make sure that we're looking for all of the building and fire code issues that we may or may not see. And then also those checklists kind of prompt our inspectors to look for additional items. They also talk with them on site about education, if they want to add other elements to their facility, or if they're planning any upgrades, if there have been changes in the code, which there have recently been, and you'll hear more about that in a presentation a little bit later today. And then the other thing that the inspectors are going to do as well is kind of be that point of contact for some of the other agencies. I think that we've talked a lot about the collaborative model, and the fire inspectors are really good at looking out for other things. One issue that you'll hear about is if there's an incident in a facility and there's a discharge of one of the systems, if there's food product being made there, it's our responsibility to give a referral to environmental health. So kind of bringing up that collaboration again, it's really important. So for those of you who are working with your fire department or are not, you may want to make those contacts now and try to make sure that you build those relationships before you're actually conducting those inspections so you know who to contact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Rudolph, who is one of our marijuana inspectors, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the actual inspections.
Hi there. My name's Mark Rudolph. I'm one of the inspectors for the marijuana group here. I had my notes on here, but I'm going to go off script a little bit, which makes Nicole nervous. But so basically, when I get the building here and I'm going to start my inspection, it's it's clean, it's good, it's ready to go. Everybody's seen it, they've approved it. My job as the inspector is to make sure that it stays that way over the years. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. There's a lot of changes in the marijuana industry, one or two here and there. And one of those big ones that we're finding is the extraction operations. What began as just a small, simple operation using a pint of butane is turned into hundreds of pounds of butane at a time. So our regulations have changed in that regard. We now require Class 1 Division 1, which is the equivalent of a paint booth, a spray booth. And the challenge for that is keeping track of how that change gets completed and being able to tell who's where in the process of getting that change over and who hasn't. Pesticides, of course, remain an issue. We don't have authority over the pesticides, but we're partnered with the rest of the city. We issue a pesticide inventory statement, and it gives a quick overview of what is in the building to help other inspectors as they come into the building, so they are aware of the risks. Also, an issue we're starting to address now is a lot of these facilities that are growing will have their no lenses in their grow lights. We've had at least 3 fires in this regard from this when light bulbs explode. So right now we're requiring everybody to have their lenses in place, just not only from a fire safety point of view, but also from the issue of employee safety. So we're getting a little bit of pushback from that, but that's what we've decided. Also, the issue of there's a lot of equipment involved in this process, whether it's a MIP or a grow or even just packaging equipment, making sure that it's properly approved. My favorite term is listed and approved. That's my question is this equipment listed and is it approved for this use? A lot of times the answer to one may be yes, but the other one is no. So that's going to send up a red flag. We need to do some further research. One of those things is making sure that it's something that's been accepted through one of the nationally recognized testing lab under OSHA. So that's one of our aspects we're looking at. Also, issues and concerns that we have continues to be the basics. People want to protect their property. Locking and egress continues to be a problem. I tell people quite often you can lock people out, but you can't lock them in. Also, there's been a change where before we used to be able to get in fairly easily. Now, as they're getting tired of seeing my face, I get a lot of, well, I can't let you in, my boss isn't here. And fortunately, working with the state and excise and license, they have some pretty rigid rules about letting inspectors in, so that I do have good recourse from that. And the reason why I want to get in is things change rapidly overnight. My favorite example is we were doing an inspection at a place, and a couple years later ran across a couple of the extractors that had been working there at the time. And they said, oh yeah, we were extracting with butane. We had this 100-pound tank we're dragging from room to room ahead of you guys. You guys never caught us. So whenever somebody doesn't want to let me in, that sends up a red flag, increases my concern. So at the same time, there's also times when it's appropriate to reschedule. I came across a place where a guy answered the door and he's sweating and just at wit's end, obviously, and the parking lot was full, and I look around and I said, I'm here to do a fire inspection. He said, well, okay. And I look in, he says, it's kind of a bad day, huh? And he said, yeah. He said, the security cameras are out, the air conditioning is out, and all the trimmers are here. So I said, you know what, you're having a bad day, let me come back some other time. So it is a partnership with our operators as well as our fellow inspectors. As you can see, the growers are very intent on maintaining light discipline. Emergency egress lights are covered. Duct tape's their favorite, their best friend that goes over CO2 sensors just as easily as egress lighting. Keep that light discipline down for them, so it continues to be something that we look at quite often. Just the basics. We're also finding hidden occupancies. It's fairly easy to hide right next to a legitimate place. In between, if you pace off the walls, you might find that there's what you had inside doesn't add up to what's outside. Let's see if I can make the laser work. So in here, this is a relatively new facility, and in the background right there is some electrical equipment, and all their safety doors are open because their air handling system wasn't working properly, and it was too hot in there. So we take care of the plants. We got to keep the plants happy. The whole building is a life support system for these plants. The people don't matter. Code safety isn't the priority. It's always the plants. Over here on the right, this is a steel bar that fire crews cut off. We had a fire that was caused by a light that exploded, and this is an egress point. It has an exit sign on the inside. This bar was attached across the top. There's a lock here, so it sits in the notches, and it prevents people from getting in. And it also works pretty good for keeping people out. There was an employee that had passed out from smoke inhalation on the other side of this door. So crews cut the bar off and got them out. Even just simple things as far as three-way adapters, those aren't allowed. We've had several. Just recently there was a fire at a high school prom that's caused by extension cords and power strips. So I sound like a broken record all the time telling people the same things, but it's the basics that still continue to confound a lot of these operators. Up on the upper left is the results of a fire from a broken light. These plants and the tables and the plastic burned. It happened over a weekend. There's a sprinkler building. The heat never got high enough to initiate a sprinkler head, and it just filled the whole room with smoke. When they looked at their security cameras, just at one point in time, all the cameras went dark. And this is exactly where I would, as an inspector, would come in and notify the public health. They can make the determination if these are close enough to harvest, whether they would be considered a food product, and if it needs to be destroyed after all this room was filled with black smoke. Also, the CO2 detectors, just like smoke detectors, get dirty, and that required them to have their CO2 enrichment system tested again. This is a terrible picture, but this occupancy is one of those hidden occupancies where somebody just appeared in between two other build-outs, and just a normal-sized warehouse that they had modified. The exit light's out, so that's a definite fire code violation there. And sulfur. We don't allow sulfur burners. It's just too hard to maintain that level of safety that would be required in order to keep the employees safe or emergency responders. If there was a release, when they burn this sulfur, it turns into sulfur dioxide, which when you breathe it in becomes sulfuric acid. So here's an example of our inspection checklist. We just kind of came up with our most common violations that we found over time, put them in a logical order, starting from the outside, working to the inside. It also, on our iPads that we use, when we send those out, it also has a copy of the code attached to it. So when I write a violation, they get a copy of the code that they violated, really helps a lot with any pushback and answers a lot of questions right away. And again, for their best practices, like we've said before, all these people sitting here are the people I want to call when I'm doing an inspection and I have any questions. The idea is I know what they're looking for, not so that I can do their inspection, but so that I can know what's serious, what's just something to notify them of, and how to best mitigate this situation. And I think that's it for me. Yes. All right. Thank you.
Hello, all. Let's talk food safety. Food safety, fun. My name is Kara Laveau. I'm a public health investigator for Denver Environmental Health, specifically the Public Health Inspection Division. I'll start by explaining our division a little bit. We're Denver Environmental Health, and then within that, I work for the Division of Public Health Inspections, and then within that, I'm in the Food Safety and Marijuana section. So we have about 27 employees. We have Denver broken up in 16 or 17 unique districts, and so there's a district inspector for each of those districts, and so they would do routine inspections of all the food facilities in that district, including marijuana facilities. Two of us have become subject matter experts on marijuana, and that's myself and my colleague Kim Stuck here. So the two of us, we're full-time employees. We no longer have a district, and we specialize in marijuana. So Kim and I do a lot of MIP inspections. We do some more specialized things in marijuana, including product evaluations for shelf stability, and we also do all of the contamination investigations, especially the pesticide investigations. If any of you heard our director, Danica, talk yesterday, they still are taking up a large amount of our time, and Kim and I probably spend half of our job doing contamination investigations. A little bit about the inspection process overview. Brian showed you that chart earlier that shows that we do a lot of inspections. We do routine inspections. We're really involved with marijuana businesses from almost the beginning. So we do a plan review of their plans, with an eye on food safety. We conduct site visits prior to their opening to approve their new licenses. And then once they're up and operational is when we start with our routine inspections. So stores, manufacturers get 2 inspections per year from us, and that might increase if we need to do a re-inspection for a reason, or if we get a complaint investigation, we'll go out on that, or if we're conducting some sort of contamination investigation, that might include more site visits. There's a variety of food products, and I see here that I have a picture of a Dixie product. So we've got Dixie in the house, so I hope that you don't, I just realized I've got a Dixie product on there. So a lot of fun products. A little bit briefly about our authority. Denver is set up a little bit differently. We are our own city and county. It's a home rule jurisdiction, so we do have our own food safety regulations. We operate under the Denver Revised Municipal Code, chapters 23 and 24, and those chapters give us some unique enforcement tools to use. So under chapter 23, we have the authority to fine a facility up to $2,000 per inspection. We also have the authority to close a facility on the spot during a site visit if there's imminent health hazards present. Chapter 24 gives us some additional enforcement tools to use, specifically court summons. So we can issue a court summons, we write a ticket, and that results in a court summons for the owner usually. Things like that we would do for hindering an investigation, not allowing us to do an inspection, not obeying with an order that we've issued to a facility. What sort of products do we regulate under our food safety regulations? Well, all marijuana products that can be consumed via non-smoking oral consumption. So that's that definitely includes edibles, but it also goes a bit further to include things like capsules or tinctures that you would drop under your tongue. So all of those are included in this definition of non-smoking oral consumption. What kind of operations do we routinely inspect? Well, we inspect all of the retailers, so that's what you would typically think of as your dispensaries. We inspect the manufacturers, and from a food safety standpoint, it doesn't make much difference to us. We don't differentiate between medical and recreational products. It's all regulated the same under our food safety regulations. So what are some of the things that we've seen during inspections, challenges that we've come across, typical violations that we see? I'm not going to go through all of these challenges. We've worked through a lot of these, and just to keep this a little bit on the shorter side, I'll just hit on some of the more interesting ones. With our manufacturers, there's definitely a staff safety component that is first and foremost for our department. So we've worked with risk management. They've come out with us. We've identified unique risks that our staff needs to take into account, when we're doing inspections. Things with the extraction equipment. It's much different inspecting a MIP than it is inspecting King Soopers. It's a very different situation. So there's specific, staff safety is an ongoing training issue for us that we take seriously. Contamination issues. As Danica spoke to yesterday, it's a continued issue for us. So, on a MIP inspection, we're asking questions now. Where are you getting this trim? Are you screening this for pesticide residues? Definitely asking some more questions and trying to avoid these situations from happening. With our retailers, one of the main things we're looking for on a dispensary inspection is whether or not products need to be refrigerated for food safety. So when I'm doing a dispensary inspection, I honestly pick up each and every item and see if it is something that falls within our category of a potentially hazardous food, which leads me to my next slide. So all marijuana extractions, concentrates, and a lot of the infused products are considered potentially hazardous foods under our food regulations, meaning that they need to be one of three things. They need to be refrigerated at 41 degrees or less from production through sale. They need to be approved by our department as being okay to store it at room temperature. In other words, an approval for shelf stability. So I'll get into that in a minute. Or they need to be labeled. If the product is labeled for smoking or vaping only, then we're not going to regulate that under our food regs. So what is the food safety concern? And it's an interesting one, I think. It's botulism. So who would think, but botulism spores are ubiquitous in plant material, in soil, and the botulism spores are hardy, very hardy, so they can survive cooking. They can survive pasteurization temperatures. And so it's definitely a food safety concern with us when there's so many products, being used with the plant material. So we do have a system that MIP operators can submit and try to get an approval for their product because, let's face it, a MIP operator doesn't really want their tincture stored in a refrigerator behind the counter. It's not going to sell as well as it is, in plain sight in that dispensary. So there's an incentive, to store their products at room temperature, but we need to make sure from the food safety side that it's a safe product to do so. So a MIP operator submits written plans to us, and our approvals are based on those written plans. So we review those, and we're looking for control measures that control for Clostridium botulinum spores. So there's a number of ways that can count as control measures for CBOT spores. There's thermal step. We use this chart right here that I've included. It's actually from the canning industry. And that brings up another point. We don't have a lot of food safety information to go on with marijuana. So there's not, published studies about how pathogens grow in marijuana or how it grows in marijuana-derived foods. So we have to rely on what we already know about food safety and use some resources from other industries. So our messaging is that it is a new regulatory realm, but it's really exciting. I love my job. It's a super exciting time to be a regulator. It's really rare that we get an entirely new industry to regulate, and it's awesome, I think. But with that said, the bottom line from the health department standpoint is that we do have a duty to the public to protect public health and to ensure that products that are being purchased are safe from a food safety standpoint. Lessons learned. It has been a good model for our department to create 2 full-time employees that are marijuana specialists. It has worked out well for us, and it's helped us streamline some of our marijuana inspection and investigation processes to have 2 of us doing this full-time. So this has been a good model for us to go by. Number two is that the external communication piece really is key, and I know some other agencies have talked about that, but there really is a strong interest from the public, from the media, for marijuana information and stories, and we get a high volume of calls. And I know a lot of the other agencies have talked about data collection as well, but this is where that really comes in key. So we've gotten pretty darn good at collecting data, and we can easily answer a question when it comes in for, how many units have we recalled in the last month? How many recalls have we done, in this time frame? We can easily pull that information, and that's been very helpful for us. And last, I'm not going to harp on collaboration again because everyone is saying that, but it really is such a strong key element to a successful marijuana regulatory program. So with that, I'm going to pass it on over to excise and license. Thank you.
How's it going? Hopefully you're staying awake here. My name is Anthony Arnich. I'm an excise and licenses inspector. We have 5 territories, 5 inspectors, 1 chief inspector that help us cover the metro area. Right now, our overview of what we do is we primarily come out and check, make sure it's secure, make sure the valid alarm permit is good, video equipment is working, limited and restricted access signs are up. Employees have the right badges to actually be working there. Hours of operations for our retail stores and medical stores, making sure they're operating in between the right hours. And then one of our most important ones is diagrams, making sure the diagram matches the licensed premise. Make sure people aren't growing or going out of their licensed premise area. And then we do a proximity alert or a proximity measurement where we make sure we measure 1,000 feet from another facility, a store, school, things like that, daycares. Right now, we conduct just over 1,000 compliance inspections. We'll hit that this year. That doesn't include transfer of ownerships, transfer of locations, and also permanent modifications. So you can imagine how many inspections we get done through the year by this. When we conduct our inspection, our primary focus is security of the location. And like I said, the diagram is one of the ones, making sure the layout is perfect on that. We just want to make sure they're not up there building new rooms, adding on. Maybe they moved into the next unit next to them, and it's not in their licensed premise. We also ensure that in our inspection, when we're completed with it and we approve it, that they are ready to start, either to open up their store, whatever it may be, to grow. We are the last ones that sign the inspection card before they get licensed. So we want to make sure everything's ready to go when they get their issuance of their license and they're in good standings with the city. Some of our red flags, of course, on our plants there's no tags on them. So that shows us right away that they're probably not in the metric system, probably working illegally somewhere. So that would be a good red flag for us. Other ones are working without a license, while working with an expired license, they never renewed it, or somehow someone sold them a license, that's no good, and they're still operating. The diagram doesn't match, workers don't have the right IDs, and the most important one is the DVR is not working. So we go in there and there's not, cameras that are working, cameras aren't seeing different things, dry rooms, grow rooms, I mean, it could be anything. And we see that they're not working, they're not running, that would be a big red flag for us to turn it into a big investigation, which we team up with the detectives, state MED, we all go out there together, and we'll find out exactly what's happening. Marijuana and changing the industry right now, I think just the mindset over the owners have changed. They know now it could be actually a successful business. They get out of the mindset of they don't have to grow in their basements anymore. They can grow out here with, own a business, make it successful. The other thing is the transfer of ownerships are big. People are buying people out. People are coming in from out of state buying people out. So with that alone, we're seeing a lot of new players in the game, kind of make it, different, educating them when they come into the state on how marijuana is done here in Colorado or in Denver. And then also our compliance inspections. Our compliance inspections will stay once a year, and then if they fail, we go back out. We go back out and make sure they're very compliant, or we shut them down. And then with that comes a general violation and a GV. Maybe. Oh, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Paul Street. I'm a detective with Denver Police Department, a marijuana detective. Let me start with this next slide. So we're going to start with the most important piece of this slide. And that's Bill Lumberg. I don't know if you guys all know who Bill Lumberg is from Office Space. I have a cubicle similar to this, and I have a person that visits my cubicle on a regular basis. It's the female version of Bill Lumberg, and it's Marley Bordowski. She's one of our city attorneys. And you can see the caption there. She'll come up and she'll say, "Paul, if you could just file that marijuana case, that would be great." And then she might add, "I'm going to need you to come in and work on Saturday." No, she doesn't do that. She just calls me on the phone and tells me that. So you guys have heard from my commander, James Henning, yesterday, and others, why the police are involved, and it's pretty clear why the police are involved. But before I jump into that, what I'm going to talk about is basically administrative and criminal cases against licensed businesses from a police perspective. And it's in no way to say that everyone in the marijuana industry is a criminal actor or is involved in criminal activity, because that's just not the case. We have a lot of really good business people in the industry that are doing a great job. But of course, when the cops are involved, we're involved in the investigations when someone's not doing something right. So across the board in the industry, we've got really good business people. We've got people that just aren't good at business and do a poor job and find themselves with a ton of regulatory violations and in some cases criminal citations. And then we've got the Jeff Spicolis of the marijuana industry, if you guys know who that guy is. I'm dating myself a little bit, but that's the guy from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Those guys exist in the industry too. So again, in no way, this is what I'm going to talk about. It doesn't label the industry in no way as criminal actors or being involved in crimes. So why the police? Marijuana is still a controlled substance, and as a law enforcement agency, we have an interest in that, and we're interested in the movement of marijuana in our city, and we're interested in diversion from marijuana businesses if it's happening. And we know from past cases and current cases that licensed businesses have been involved in the diversion of marijuana out of the state of Colorado. So that's a big concern. And the Cole memo, I know you guys, most people in here have heard of the Cole memo. People have talked about the Cole memo in the symposium. But the piece I want to talk about with the Cole memo is it outlines 8 areas of concern or priorities for the federal government, for the Department of Justice. And we, as a local law enforcement agency, are very concerned about those priorities. A couple of those being sales to minors, regulated marijuana finding itself to states where it's not regulated, criminal organizations, gangs, drug trafficking organizations getting their hands on revenue from regulated marijuana. And there's a couple others, but there's one I want to read actually from the Cole memo so I don't get it wrong. Preventing state-authorized marijuana activity from being used as a cover or pretext for the trafficking of other illegal drugs or other illegal activity. Other illegal activity. Diversion of marijuana. We have cases, big cases in the past where medical marijuana businesses, before retail went live, medical marijuana businesses being used as a front for the trafficking of large amounts of marijuana outside of the state of Colorado. And that still remains a concern today, and we investigate cases like that. Regulatory and criminal enforcement, that kind of goes to my duties. My primary duties as a marijuana detective is filing administrative and criminal cases with the city attorney and the district attorney's office. So the way I do that is I utilize what you see there, city ordinances, MED rules for administrative cases, and state statutes. State statutes particular to licensed marijuana are found in our Title 12 of our Colorado state statutes. And then, of course, last on the list there, public safety, but no less important than the others. Let me go back. No less important than the others. You heard, again, Commander Henning talking about burglaries and other crimes. There's robberies. It doesn't happen a lot, but burglaries we're 51% higher in burglaries this year than we were last year. So it continues to be a problem, and we're concerned about it, and that poses a public safety risk. And we also use that as an opportunity to kind of get with the industry and talk about ways to fortify their businesses, to help them become less of a victim to crime. So we get in there as much as we can, talk about ways that they can secure their facility, if they can secure their product when they're not there, overnight security, ensuring that their cameras are working, ensuring that their alarm systems are working properly so we can have fast response times to alarms. If there's no alarms, we're not necessarily going to know about it and we're not responding. So all things that we try to work on with the industry. So these are some common violations that I see and that I'll file cases with the city attorney's office on. Common violations, marijuana product overages. I put medical in there because that's typically something that we see with medical centers or grows. As you've heard before by Dave Miller and others, medical marijuana businesses are required to have a patient list, and they can only produce as much marijuana that those patient lists allow for. So what we'll see is they'll produce way more. We'll go into a place and it could be identified through metric through the state, and that's how we'll get this information typically. And we'll go out jointly with the state and we'll do an inventory, a physical inventory at that facility and find that they're, not just a little bit over in some cases, but they could be hundreds of pounds over their allowed limits. I'm working on a case where it's several hundred pounds right now. I'm going to show you a slide later just of a picture of a room of marijuana that went on hold. It was about 75 pounds of marijuana that's on hold, and that was an overage case. Those cases can result in being over. So let me go back a little bit. Being over, that will, it's both a criminal charge and can result in an administrative case filing against the licensee. So we're hanging paper for a criminal charge on the owner. We're also writing up a administrative case that we submit to the city attorney's office for a potential show cause against the license. So let me move on. Age compliance cases, that's really for retail cases, retail licensees. We conduct age compliance cases regularly in the city and county of Denver. And I can tell you that since we started doing it, every single time that we've gone into a retail storefront, that at least one has sold to an underage person. And there's no tricks. We don't try to fool the industry at all here. We send in, and it's not a secret, we send in a Denver police cadet who's under the age of 21 with their valid Colorado license or ID card. And they walk in and they present that ID to the bud tender or whoever's working security at the door. And it's very clear that in Colorado, IDs, you get them in one of two ways. A vertical ID is issued to people that are under 21, and it clearly says on that vertical ID, under 21 in red. So if you're looking at it, there's no way to not know that the person presenting that is under 21. And then, of course, over 21 are landscape IDs. But so there's no tricks. We're not sending people in with fake IDs, none of that. The cadet goes in, they present that ID, and believe it or not, some of these places are letting people in. We've done it a number of times, and in every case we've done it, we've had at least one violation. In some of those operations, we've had up to 7. one operation. And the way we come up with doing this is not a secret either. The way we come up with doing this is we work with the MED on this, and they're our partners in it. They come out with us on all these operations, and they help us create a list it's a risk-based list, just like Dave was talking about their risk-based approach to inspecting marijuana businesses. We use that same type of approach in identifying retail locations to, I don't want to say target, but to go to in these operations. And that could be someone that was in violation on a previous operation. We revisit that place. Someone that's had other issues or had some type of maybe an administrative investigation in the past or discipline, we'll visit that location to see if they're complying with age compliance. Age compliance is a huge deal, and going back to the Cole memo, it's a concern of the federal government. So we want to be able to say we're addressing some of these concerns. Operating without a license, and that includes operating on expired licenses too. You heard Anthony talk about it, you heard Dave Miller talk about it. There's a lot of people that it's a dual license system, right? A lot of people will get issued one or the other license and they'll start operating. You can't do it. You have to have both in place. One's conditional on the other. You have to have them both to start operating. People want to get going. They want to get busy. They want to start making money. I get it, but you can't jump the gun, and we hold people accountable for this. It's a big deal, and we follow up on this, and this leads to both criminal charges, and it can lead to an administrative case filing against the license holder. Advertising violations, and I got a couple of pictures and and a video. One's about advertising violations. Our local ordinance for advertising violations is a good one, and we enforce that. There's a lot of things that you can't do advertising. For example, if you're a brick and mortar store, you can have a permanently affixed sign on the building saying who you are. That's pretty much it. You can't have a sandwich board out front saying, the quarter-ounce special of the day. You can't have a guy dancing around on the sidewalk in a cartoon suit that I'm going to show you, saying, hey, come in here, we got specials, whatever. You can't do any of that. 420 events. We have a big one here. It's in Civic Center Park. Licensed marijuana businesses cannot have tents, cannot have booths. They can have them. They can't advertise at them. So there can't be any advertising. It can't say ABC Marijuana with a big banner over the booth. That's an advertising violation, and we'll cite people for those criminally, and we'll also file an administrative filing against the licensee. And finally, waste disposal. That's important too, and that is a violation that can affect public health. You're required, the MED rules require you to make marijuana waste, unrecognizable and unusable. And that takes either mixing with some, old soil, 50-50 mix, and putting it in the trash, making it unrecognizable, unusable. You'd be surprised how many people are not doing this. If you just take a little extra time and do it right, we wouldn't have these problems. So the problems are, we have a homeless problem here, a lot of homeless people in the city, and they know where these marijuana businesses are. And they know where their trash receptacles are, and they dig in them all the time. And another rule is that you're required to keep these locked up. Well, we'll go out to marijuana businesses and we'll address these concerns on waste complaints, and we'll look at their trash receptacle, and we'll see that it's not locked. And the story is often, yeah, we can't keep a lock on the thing. People keep cutting them off, and we put another one on, and they keep cutting them off. That leads me to believe one thing, that there's something in there that people want. And if you're making it unrecognizable and unusable, people are going to stop cutting the lock off because they're going to find out there's nothing in there they want. So they're going to stop doing it. That's a problem, and we try to work with the industry on those and go over these same things I just talked to you about and educate them a little bit on the rules. But if it's a continued problem, we'll do an administrative case for those rule violations. So I'm going to do a couple examples of some cases, and then I'll get out of here because we're running over. So real quick, this is an example, and this is a video. This is an example of a diversion case. And it's not necessarily a diversion case that the industry, the licensee was involved directly, but this is a medical marijuana patient that was going around to medical marijuana centers and buying up as much marijuana as she could in a short period of time. And a little background on it is these two guys sitting in the car from Iowa, and the plates on this car are Iowa plates. And they come down to Denver and they meet up with this gal that's a medical marijuana patient, and they enter into an agreement to go around and buy up as much weed as they can, and they're gonna take it back to Iowa. So I'm gonna show you the video, and this is a good video. These guys park right underneath the camera at a medical marijuana center, and they give me all the evidence I need for a distribution case. So I'll let you guys watch this. If I can get it going here. It's a short video.
Very short.
Yeah, see, it's done.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my suspect walking out of the store. And tell me when you see, for a cop, what I was all excited about. Boom, right there. So I've got these people going, and it ends here with them pulling out. And let me stop that, because right there, is it? Well, we're, oh, okay. So when that car was backing out, there was some indicators or some clues for me or some evidence that allowed me to link up what happened later with this car. The plate on it, it's an Iowa front plate, and it's bent. It's coming off of the mounting. And I was able to, after reviewing this video a whole bunch of times, I was able to get 5 of the 6 characters from the plate, determine what those were. Well, what happens is, and I'll be quick, about 5 hours later, this same car gets stopped by Colorado State Patrol leaving Colorado into Nebraska. And the state trooper does his investigation. Ultimately, what he does is he finds several pounds of marijuana in this car, and much of it has the name and medical marijuana number of that patient all over it. So they get stopped. The state patrol seizes all the evidence, tows the car, jails the 2 guys in the car from Iowa for possession with intent to distribute marijuana. I get a call later, and the MED was involved in this, because that trooper contacts the Longmont MED office up there and says, hey, I got all this pot in this car with this medical marijuana patient's name and number all over it. Can you help me out? So MED helps them out up there, and ultimately they give me a call, and I get involved to try to pursue charges and tie up all the loose ends on our medical marijuana patient down here in Denver. So ultimately, the reason for showing this is a clear sign of diversion of licensed marijuana, and it happens here every day. Every day this is happening. And you can go to any medical marijuana place and you'll find cars parked in that parking lot with out-of-state plates on it. And this is what those people are doing. Not all of them, but you know, I'm a cop, so I'm suspicious, right? A lot of them are doing it. So I was able to get 3 felony charges on that gal. That case is pending, but it's a good case, and it's marijuana that came from the regulated industry, and it lends itself to the concerns that we read about in the Cole memo. So we're working on things that are concerns of theirs, and we can show that, and I like that. So this is real quick, this is one of our advertising cases. My partner, Aaron Kafer, worked on this. This is a marijuana business that had one of their employees dancing around on the sidewalk wearing this suit. Now, you can't advertise that. Would a kid like that? I think a kid would probably find that pretty entertaining. Well, advertising can't be directed towards children. I think that this is directed towards children. And we filed a case on it. Marley worked on this case. Aaron filed a case with, filed criminal charges, it's a criminal citation, and we also did a administrative case against the licensee in this case. So it's a good one, and we're concerned about those as well. And finally, I alluded to this earlier, this is about 75 pounds of marijuana, and it was an overage at a medical marijuana grow. It's all finished product, some of it's curing, some of it's packaged. That packaged product can't be at a medical facility, a grow facility, for more than 48 hours once it's packaged. It has to go to the center, that's one of the rules. But the thing here is most of this marijuana, the licensee couldn't even tell us what batch number it was, when it was harvested. So we couldn't even know if that marijuana had been sitting there for, a week or 2 weeks, and actually some of it had been there for a long time. That's an administrative case. That's also a criminal case. I cited that licensee criminally under our Title 12 code, and I filed an administrative case against the license in this case. So those are just some examples, and I know I'm going a little bit over, but I'm going to leave a bunch of cards here, and for law enforcement, or really anybody, but for law enforcement in here, if you want to get in touch with me, ask us about how we file these administrative cases, because we all know how to file criminal cases, right? But when it comes to filing administrative cases, I got up here and I'm like, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? My partner Aaron and I, he started up here a few months before me, but we over a couple of years have kind of tweaked that and tried to put together the best product we can for the city attorney's office. So when they get this from us, they can just flip through it. It's summarized well. All the information that they need is on the face, licenses, contact people, all that. I can provide examples of that for you if you need them, if you're going to be doing that, which I think you will. So thank you.
I can see everybody starting to wiggle, so I'm going to go extremely fast. My name's Brian Snow. I'm a paralegal up on the marijuana unit in the city attorney's office. And what I wanted to talk about was that next step. As Paul kept saying, he files administrative cases. So if you can imagine this process playing out where Paul's investigating maybe a diversion case, those people are arrested criminally. Those are criminal charges where a single person is going to have to go and answer in court to those charges. What we're focused on is the license. How do we translate that investigation or that criminal arrest into discipline on the license? And hopefully with discipline on the license, we can transform that into compliance within the whole industry. So these are some of the common show cause or complaints we're getting from our city agencies. Obviously from fire, we're getting the fire code violations and the CO2 extractions. From zoning, it's permitted uses, like Paul had talked about, underage cases and diversion from the police department and their partners at the Med. And environmental health, we're obviously seeing the pesticide cases. So again, how do we take these violations and turn those into actions on the license that hopefully leads to compliance within the whole industry? So some of their tools, as inspectors, they're out there inspecting places. They notice a violation. Those really low-level violations, they can give a verbal warning and oral recommendation. As we increase in seriousness, we can do a notice of violation order to contact. Again, low-level violations, but we document those, and we give the licensee a chance to correct. And then we move up into general violations. Those are our city ordinances. And then, as Paul had talked about, again, criminal charges under our state codes. So again, how do we take these enforcement mechanisms from our different city agencies and turn that into compliance on a license? All of our marijuana licenses in Denver are issued under Chapter 32 of our Denver Revised Municipal Code. 32.1 says, the Director of Excise and License shall have the full power to grant, renew, suspend during investigation, and revoke after notice and hearing thereon all licenses issued under authority of this chapter. So what does that process look like? Paul kept referring to administrative cases. At the end of one of these investigations, whether a person is cited or not, or a person is arrested or not, that information, that investigation will come to us, to our team. We'll file a complaint. We have 2 attorneys on our unit that specialize in show cause cases. They'll file a complaint, and it's basically the alleged violations. We'll forward that to our Director of Excise and License. She can then issue an order to show cause. And what that is we are ordering that licensee to respond to the department for a hearing where they have to show us cause why their license should not be suspended or revoked. This looks similar to any other trial you've seen. We'll have an independent hearing officer. We'll have city attorneys that prosecute the case. We'll have witnesses, testimony, cross-examination. At the end of this hearing, that hearing officer will issue a recommended decision, and that's forwarded to the director. The director then has the opportunity to file a final decision or discipline the license. A couple of things to point out. Our system is based off the Colorado Liquor Code. It looks similar. Some of the differences. Colorado liquor licenses are controlled by the state. They're state licenses. So they kind of dictate how we can enforce compliance on a license. Marijuana licenses are obviously issued from the city. We have discretion in how we're going to discipline that license. So if you think about a criminal court, all the different strategies that they can use to gain compliance from somebody, from a suspended sentence to a fine to jail to ultimately the death penalty. Ours would be suspension or fines or revocation. That would be our death penalty for a license. Some of the lessons learned. Coordination. I think every speaker that's talked at every breakout session has talked about coordination or collaboration. The open lines of communication. I'll bring up one example of those notice of violations. We had noticed some surveillance cameras weren't functioning accordingly. They need to have 40 days of surveillance footage, and they might have 39. So our inspectors were giving them notices to comply or orders to correct because they had substantial compliance. They had invested all this money in the cameras. They had invested all the money in the surveillance equipment, and they had almost gotten to 40 days. But what would happen is, and the industry, I'm going to talk about some players in the industry, they get word that discipline is coming down. And Paul had mentioned this. These plants have so much value that when they get word that discipline is coming down, a burglary will occur. Those plants go missing. So now something that started off as small, we had 38, 39 days worth of coverage, becomes a big deal to the police department who has to investigate that burglary. Footage is missing. And that could have been intentional. So coordination between city agencies, talking about the problems that one agency is seeing and translating that into how can we correct that for other agencies. Don't get lax. Obviously, there's a lot of agencies involved in all of this. You need processes to share that communication, share that information. If you don't have regular meetings, that starts to fall apart. A colleague of mine said, every agency will take the path of least resistance. If you don't have these regular meetings, things fall apart. For the police officers and the firefighters, you guys are in a paramilitary organization. You guys can be reassigned at any time. It's important to maintain those communications, to maintain your processes. And from our office, our job isn't to tell environmental health how to investigate pesticides. We're not going to have that expertise. We're not going to have that time to go out and inspect as many places as they can, or the DPD with their criminal investigations. You need to rely on your agencies to do an effective job, to take what they're inspecting, their investigations, to turn that into compliance on a license, and then hopefully transfer that compliance to the industry as a whole. Thank you very much.
All right, we are about 10 minutes over, but we could save a few minutes for questions if anybody has any. Also, Kara forgot to mention that the pumpkin craze has hit marijuana, and they do have infused pumpkin pies, if anybody's interested.
Are you talking from experience?
No, not from experience. But go ahead, sir.
Hello, Brian Sullivan, attorney here in Denver. Great presentation by everybody, by the way. Thank you. My question is for Detective Street, as this, I don't believe this concerns the MED as it concerns non-licensed distribution. But for those operating within the rules and regulations, it's often frustrating to have to compete with those blatantly operating illegally and without license. For instance, there's a website that's been up for over a year now offering delivery of marijuana, which is obviously illegal. Has enforcement concentrated its resources on legal establishments, and that's why operations like these seem to operate without fear of being shut down?
Why, is this working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, and I hope I'm going to answer this question for you, but I can tell you that there's more Denver police detectives working on marijuana problems outside of the licensed industry than there is with the licensed industry. And it's no secret, it's me and my partner, Aaron Kafer. We work on licensed industry issues, and we've got an entire marijuana team that works on everything outside of that. So,
Right, and I've heard that. So it's interesting that how a website can maintain its presence and continue on for such a long period of time. And so obviously it is something that's looked at, but it was interesting that this was able to continue on for so long.
can you, and I'm not familiar with it, can you share that with me, that information, or jot
Yeah,
down?
it's just denversdankestdelivery.com.
Okay.
No spaces, underscores,
And
anything like that.
And I obviously would never compromise any investigations, but it's possible that our marijuana team is conducting investigations into that, the people running that website.
Yeah.
They're online every day. An example is Craigslist. Craigslist is a huge problem. Our marijuana team spends a lot of time on there. You can buy pot all day on Craigslist. So I don't want to say that your concern and is not being addressed, because it very well may be. And I'm happy to get in touch with you if I find any additional information about that and can confirm that. I'll let you know.
That's awesome. Thank
Okay.
you.
Is there any other questions? Oh, well, that is adjourned. Thank you.